Well, let's do it. Let's do it. Good to see everyone. And again, you heard my presentation on our top priorities. And for those of you who are going to say, but you didn't talk about this, I encourage you to read it because it's guaranteed in the book. We just had to pull in some of the top lines that we had spoken about in our State of the State, develop them a little bit more, but I'll be going out all over the state, everybody up here will, my commissioners, to go delve into the specifics so everybody knows the details of our $227 billion fiscal year 2024 budget. So any questions?
Governor. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So last year, you held up the budget over bail reform changes, I think, for about 9 days. Wondering if you're prepared to do that again, because as we know, this is going to be probably one of the sticking points of the budget.
So Karen, you're asking me to telegraph all my strategies on the very first day. I'll be working in a collaborative way. We have a very narrow focus. Last year was broader. We got some of the significant changes already. We needed to have some time to analyze the impacts, but what is glaring to us, and anyone who looks at it closely, is that our law has two different standards in it. And we're just focusing on that. The judges in one area are asked to consider factors in determining whether or not someone accused of a serious crime should be let out pre-trial or remanded or have bail posted. Or in the other standard says least restrictive means. We are focusing on remedying that inconsistency.
Governor, I wonder if you could shed more light on your charter school proposal. How many more do you anticipate in New York City? And do you expect a big pushback from Democrats who are very much against this, and the teachers union in particular?
What we're trying to do is something that is just common sense. This legislature approved 460 charter slots in New York State. That number has not been achieved. There's no need to raise a cap. But what did not make sense, as I try to approach government with common sense, is why there's a differential between the number of charter slots available for one city, New York City, and the rest of the state. So simply talking about combining those two numbers, so there's the same cap that had been in place, the same number, and making it one state. The other issue is the zombies, which are, again, a number that was agreed to and accepted by the legislature and everybody else they're concerned about. Maybe there's 12, 18, whatever, depending how you're counting it. Some that had been fully operational as a charter school that either closes on their own, shut down, whatever, and that's still one of those slots. So simply combining those two numbers does not raise the cap. It simply says, let's just simplify the process.
Governor, does on the NTA funding, does it square with the constitutional amendment that approved the new casinos, and will it require a law change? Because I think a lot of it has to go to education. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, we're not. We're talking about diverting part of the state share. We're not affecting education in this process. This is an important source of funding for us to meet our obligations to education. So we'll look at the legality of whether it has to be changed. I don't know that it does because we're talking about using part of the state share.
We can just clarify, it does not require, it's not inconsistent with the actual language in the Constitution.
Governor, the immediate term MTA funding seems to keep the lights on there, which is nice, but it doesn't seem to have any money for increased service, which experts have said could increase ridership, which could then maybe bring in more money. It doesn't seem to have enough to keep fare hike from happening. Why is that?
Well, we have a fiscal cliff that was unanticipated when they put forth their original plans for capital and operating. I mean, there was a plan that was blown out of the water because of the pandemic. When you're counting on a high percentage of your revenues to be derived from fares, and there's no fares to be collected, you really have to reset your expectations and how we're going to manage through this time. One option is to ignore it. People don't use the MTA. Some would say, well, why are we focusing so much on that? And I'm saying the New York City economy drives the state of New York. MTA helps drive the New York City economy, so it's critically important to all of us, and I'm trying to share that philosophy with people and elsewhere in the state. So we have to make those investments, and you have to look at the various pots of funding that are available. Increasing the payroll mobility tax will generate $800 million. Now, that's a small increase from 3.4% to 0.5%, but the scale of that is significant. That's going to be helpful. We're having conversations about the city and their share, and the state. Our budget is looking to support this as well. So Micah and Catherine, you've been very involved in this.
I think that when you look at the size of the fiscal cliff that the MTA is facing and how critical it is to not only the city's economy, but the region, it needs everyone to come up and participate in the solution. And that's including riders and businesses and the state and the city, as well as the MTA making sure that they are doing the efficiencies. So that is why we're moving forward in a way that is to ensure that the governor is leading on making sure the MTA is with us for a long time to come.
Governor, just on the Medicaid reimbursement rate increase, is the hope that that money will go toward increasing staff in the short term, increasing operations costs? And is there any concern that that could, kind of lead to perpetual spending increases in the broader Medicaid program?
No, it's a concern of ours, very much so. It's, the escalation of costs for Medicaid, especially if you look at the out years, it's rather dramatic. But we also, again, similar to the MTA, this is another part of the fallout from the pandemic. Hospitals had to incur so many more costs at a time when their revenues were declining. They couldn't do elective surgery for a long time, which is what supports a lot of their operations. They were told to move beds offline for COVID purposes, and a lot of them were unstable in the beginning, and now they're destabilized because of the extraordinary costs. So again, it's another area you can't just close your eyes and hope it goes away. You have to make decisions. But also, and I'll let Catherine respond to that as well, but also, as I talk about the healthcare crisis, it's also the mental health crisis. And what we have to do to get more beds back online, as I mentioned last year, now we're going to put more teeth behind making this happen, is to compress the reimbursement that exists now between psychiatric beds and non-psychiatric beds, because hospitals said, well, they lose so much money on psychiatric beds. You understand, psychiatric nurses cost more, psychiatrists cost more. But so we listened to them and we shrank the differential so there's no longer a financial disincentive. So that's one area we had to make some changes in just those reimbursements. But Catherine and Micah?
Certainly, the governor and this administration takes what healthcare costs very seriously. It is a huge part of New York State's budget. But we also know that we need to ensure that healthcare is available for all of our residents, particularly in an equitable way, and that we're getting good outcomes. That does require continuing investment, but it is also where we will continue to work with providers to make sure that we are getting the efficiencies that we need moving forward.
Mike, anything else you want to add? Mike, is there anything to add?
I would just add only that we're seeing, the cost structures have changed dramatically, and that's why the governor has proposed a Future of Healthcare Commission that will be looking at all of these issues on a long-term structural basis.
Why does the budget not allocate opioid settlement fund dollars to overdose prevention centers, contrary to the recommendation of your own opioid settlement advisory board?
We've said we're going to look at an all-the-above approach. I know that some states, like Rhode Island, are taking a very comprehensive look at that right now, and we're interested in seeing what the results are. Anything else on that?
Governor,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about education. The money from gambling, lottery, and from casinos a portion was supposed to go to education instead of from the general fund coming in, not in addition to. Why do you need a record number of dollars, going to education when we know throwing money at the issues of education is not necessarily solving any of the problems in the school systems?
I wouldn't call it throwing money at it. This was in response to the settlement of the foundation aid lawsuit that had been going on for a very long time. And so now, under that agreement, we owe the foundation aid number to be $2.7 billion, which is basically a large part of the $3 billion increase. So that was meeting an obligation to fund, particularly communities and schools that, there's a lot of disparity in our education systems, depending on where you live, when you have a system that's funded primarily by property taxes. So we've made sure that we're investing properly, but also, telling the schools money goes toward mental health services. We're going to have additional programs to help kids, and so I believe that we have a role to play in offering more guidance on our priorities on how that money should be spent. Anybody else?
Governor, just
The record increase on foundation aid was the result of the governor's leadership in resolving a dispute that went back decades. That resolution exists separate and apart from the issue of where casino funding goes, and I think that the record increases that the governor's giving to our public schools allows for the comprehensive MTA solution that she's proposing in this budget.
Governor, can you elaborate on funding for migrants? Have you discussed it with the president? Has the federal government committed to this 1/3 split? And how much total money is the state actually committing to providing to New York City to deal with this?
Well, the numbers continue to change because the number of individuals is changing. You know, there was a 20,000 number a while back, and all of a sudden it's 40,000. But it also, once these individuals are qualified to have status to be able to get a job, the need to support them will diminish exponentially. So this is a transition period, so we don't know the exact number coming, but we do know that the number is going to decrease in terms of people needing additional service. So I've had many conversations with the president, with Secretary of Homeland Security, with the former Chief of Staff Ron Klain on this very topic, supporting the city's efforts to get more engagement from the federal government. We've raised that. Also, we were with the president yesterday, and he did say that there'd be money coming from the federal government to help the city. He did not give a number, but we believe that they should be picking up a significant share. I've supported that from the very beginning. But you can't at this point just sit there and hope that day will come when it hasn't come at the level we still need yet. So we are supportive. We are going to commit to pay what is historically done, which is 29% of the emergency shelter funds, healthcare assistance. We've already been using resources from our National Guard. 1,000 National Guard members have been there for many, many months helping run the facilities. I mean, they literally put together baby cribs and bring in blankets. I mean, they're taking care of people in a way that, you know, is extraordinary. So the city's doing their share, we're doing our share, the federal government's doing their share, but again, continuing to push for support, and the desire we all have is to allow these people to get to jobs, because there's a lot of employers are saying, I'd like to hire them, but that's why we're adding more money to legal services so they can start the application process literally when they arrive, instead of falling between the cracks, and then they're hard to find to be able to start the process to get legal asylum here.
Governor,
Is there to pick up the 1/3, or the money that the federal government wouldn't cover up to 1/3?
What was the question?
What mechanism is there in the budget to cover any amount of that 1/3 that you want the federal government to pay that perhaps they might not end up?
We're going to keep asking the federal government for their assistance. And they know that we have a plan where we are providing a great deal of assistance. The city obviously has been providing a tremendous amount of assistance, but we also are going to keep pushing. And again, we have federal leaders with great influence in our state that we call upon to assist with this as well. Anything else on that?
just to the bail laws.
On the asylum seeker funding, the budget briefing book says $1 billion. The state's committing to $1 billion. Is that in addition to what the state has already done? I mean, you mentioned that 29%, or is this existing funding?
A combination of both. It can, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, team, but we've been living and breathing these numbers. The commitment of 29% of the emergency shelter costs is something we've done historically, but in this case, we're going to activate that for the migrants. That's a new pot of money. Healthcare. The federal government during COVID has been picking up the cost for Medicaid costs for healthcare as long as there's a COVID emergency. When that time frame lapses, which we're being told is May now, that's an additional cost that we're trying to account for, because that would be on the state. The legal services, we're already providing legal services. We're going to increase that number. I think we're at about 3 million now. Going to go up more, and I'll let Sandra can correct me on all these numbers. And then the National Guard, that's going to remain where it is. Sandra, do you have different numbers on this, or anybody else? Catherine?
One thing that I would add is that there is, while we have been supporting the city with the National Guard, for example, or through the Medicaid program, those numbers had not yet been recognized in our budget, and we are doing that now at this time. But the new additional funding is, while we usually typically fund about 29% for family shelters, we would not have been required to fund any of these sheltering costs for the migrants. And so that is a new dollar figure.
Governor, just,
Governor, just wanted to ask about your child care proposals. I know you added about the new tax incentive for businesses, but last week at a hearing about this, providers did say that a $5 billion annual investment for universal care and increasing pay for staff would be the only way to reverse the economic damages of the pandemic and also the deserts that are increasing across the state. Why isn't universal child care part of your proposal? And also they say that if you increase tied to inflation, that would and without doing universal child care, that would just increase their issues. So why is there proposal one and not the other?
I would put forth a $7.7 billion investment in child care as rather historic. I mean, that is going to be used to allow 500,000 more kids to be eligible. When I first took office, someone will correct me, but it was 67,000? 55,000 was the maximum the family could earn. A family of four could earn before they can get any of our state subsidies. And last year I said, are you kidding me? That's so low. So we increased it more, increasing it up to what the federal poverty level allowed us. That added about another 400,000 young people. And I looked at it again. I said, that's still not meeting the needs. So we increased it up to 97,000 is the threshold. So now we're going to have 500,000 children eligible. And the challenge is not that the money isn't there and the support isn't there. We have 10% of eligible families taking advantage of it. And then you say, as I discussed earlier, why is that? Why are only 10% of eligible families taking advantage of this? So we realized, we went back and peeled back the onion of what's going on here, and it's just so complicated, and parents are just saying, I can't do this. So that's why our plan to have instant eligibility for families who would already be getting government services, they would have had to already qualify based on their income and their status and their situation for other programs. Why not flip that over and just make it easier? But you're mentioning the provider side. What happened during the pandemic, we had to artificially keep a lot of child care centers alive because parents were home. I mean, moms were not going to their jobs. They were working remotely. So we had a lot of child care centers with almost no children in them at all. And we're just shifting back. And again, there's a lot of people still working remotely. The demand, and I did statewide, as Lieutenant Governor, I covered the whole state, having hearings on this. The crisis always was affordability, which we're dealing with, but also availability. And what flipped during the pandemic is there was more slots available than were being used. But I also agree with you that we need to continue supporting the providers. They need more resources. Does our budget consider?
I would just also add that we, in addition to the increase in eligibility, which now will take us to the maximum allowable for federal subsidy, the increase, the streamlining proposals around application, which we think will dramatically increase uptake. We're also talking about allocating hundreds of millions of dollars in support for providers and for the workforce in response to the pandemic.
Jimmy.
Governor, some of your proposals, both the housing proposal and the idea of using the payroll mobility tax to sort of drive money toward the MTA, they've caused a lot of consternation among officials, businesses, and people on Long Island. That's not an area where you did well in the last election. It was not the core of your base of support. And I'm just wondering if you have a response to people in that area who kind of feel like maybe they're being picked on or they're getting the short end of the stick this year in some of your proposals.
Right. Just so all New Yorkers understand, nothing I do in a budget is driven by politics, elections, outcomes. I'm guided by what is best for New Yorkers. And I've talked to so many business leaders and elected leaders on Long Island who support this because they know they're losing out to New Jersey and Connecticut and other states because they don't have housing. When you have a region that's as desirable as Long Island, and there are extraordinary assets on Long Island, and great employers want to be on Long Island, especially in the research corridor with Stony Brook and what we're doing with Cold Spring Harbor and what we're doing with our offshore wind. I mean, and Brookhaven, my gosh, we have resources like no other place on this earth. And people want to bring jobs there, and the number one I get complaint from employers who want to expand or who want to go there's no housing for our workers. So this is a situation that ultimately will support Long Island expanding their tax base, because taxes are very high. The more business you have, the more people living there, the more it's spread around. This is after managing a lot of municipal budgets. Helps them, the more people there are. So I will deal with any initial reservations or hesitations or people disagreeing with me. I have no trouble going out there and speaking to everybody from the Long Island Association and the contractors and the businesses and the people and the elected leaders. I will go there because I want to just tell them this is all about liberating Long Island to be the best it can be. And people want to be able to raise their kids in the same fabulous communities they raised in themselves, the great educational opportunities, the higher education. So I think that any spin on it to say to the contrary is just not true.
Rebecca, then Josh, and then reminder, Sandra's available at 2 p.m. in the blue room.
Just two quick questions. First, regarding the migrant crisis, Mayor Adams has repeatedly asked for state assistance to relocate migrants out of New York City to other willing cities throughout the state. As far as I know, you have not committed to helping with that particular initiative. Is any of the $1 billion going to go towards assisting relocation to other cities that have the capacity?
Rebecca, what we found in speaking to the mayor nonstop over this, our staffs talk every single day on this, and have been for a very, very long time. The request to see about relocation, we talk to county executives and mayors who want to be helpful, but there is a qualifier too. Because of the status that these individuals have, not the same as refugee status for someone from Afghanistan or Ukraine, where they can get a job very quickly, there is a significant time lapse before individuals who apply. It's 6 months after they've applied, is that right? It's a lot longer than I thought it would be. Okay, so after you've applied, so I believe there's going to be a huge outpouring of support for people to go elsewhere, especially when they have this status. And some of them should be approaching this now. They've been here long enough, and I will continue supporting them. I've talked to leaders. There's an interest, but for now, our focus is to help the city get through this and also open up opportunities to other parts of the state, because there is interest, but they don't get the same federal reimbursement as if someone had a refugee status. There's a different dynamic going on, but we've talked to them about assisting them financially as well. Anything else to add on that? Catherine's our...
The only thing I would say is we want to make it so that when people are able to move and want to move to other parts of the state, that we make sure that that's effective and welcoming, as it has been, particularly for the Ukrainian and Afghanistani refugees that have moved to many of the towns across the state.
And just with regards to your housing plan, I don't believe I saw any references to labor requirements for the new projects, new construction. Is that something that will be included in the details of your actual bills, or are there not going to be, specific labor requirements for the new construction?
Well, we're also asking the private sector to step up without, on their own. We're putting on localities our expectation that they will increase their housing stock by 3% downstate, 1% upstate. So that'll be worked out the way housing gets built in those communities. Already, we're not telling them they have to do this at this point. But for larger affordable housing projects where we have part of our $25 billion investment there, yes, we have restrictions and requirements on that. Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The bulk of the housing plan is about removing obstacles to traditional development, and thus would not in the normal course involve those kinds of protections. The one exception I would note is on the commercial conversions proposal, where you are talking in general about large buildings in the city of New York currently subject to prevailing wage requirements for building service workers, and the governor's proposal would extend those requirements to the converted buildings.
Governor, two quick gun-related questions.
Did I say you can do unrelated questions, Josh?
Gun.
Oh, good. I thought you said unrelated. I said, toss them out.
No.
We got enough on the budget to talk about. I'll be out so often, you'll get me anytime you want, but gun-related, yes, sorry about that.
Do you view it as necessary to keep the state of emergency related to gun violence to achieve your goals on gun violence and getting that money out the door?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those who know me know that it's a rare day when I say I'm satisfied that we're done, we're moving on. We still have a gun crisis in many of our cities. We've seen better numbers in terms of shootings and homicides compared to what we went through during the pandemic. But judging ourselves by the pandemic here is not my standard of what success looks like. I'm going back pre-pandemic, and the numbers are looking better, but I speak to mayors all the time. I just recently visited the mayor of Rochester and Syracuse, and one of the problems they're having? I said, do you have enough police officers? I can add more people. You have some of our state police on the ground. He says, we had an academy class that just graduated a couple weeks ago. He said, only 5 people are in it. He says, we are funded. I said, is this a funding issue? He said, we are funded up to, I think, again, I don't have the exact numbers, but about 480 we're funded up to. And we only have in the 300s of police officers. So there's also another dynamic that's going on, that the cities that are struggling to get guns out of the hands of individuals who should not have them or stop the flow of guns from coming into them are struggling with meeting that demand with resources and people. So I believe that we still need that status of the emergency. It allows us to do what we need to do, but I hope there's a day when we say it's over, but I don't see that happening yet, especially in communication with a lot of city mayors. That's why we're adding $317 million, about a $100 million increase to the gun violence elimination initiatives, the GIVE program, which we're told are very successful. I don't tell people that it's successful. They tell me. I have regular communication with elected leaders. But anything else on our GIVE program or gun program? We good?
I would just add on that, we do rely on it for some key grant programs. It's narrowly construed. It's not used broadly to, avoid following procurement guidelines. But for these very needed grant programs, it's still needed.
Yeah, that's an even better answer.
I apologize. Governor, changing the bail law, is it just the conflicting language, or were you looking at other data regarding crime or repeat offenders that also forced some of these thoughts to change them?
No, we looked at this very thoughtfully and realized what judges are telling us, that they don't have the clarity that they need to have when someone's before them and meets the standards of being bail eligible in particular. What criteria they use to determine whether or not to impose bail or not, or let someone out, impose bail or remand. And what they tell us is, what are we supposed to do? We have standards we're supposed to look at. Was there a gun involved? Is this, a repeat crime? Was there an order of protection violated? Was this a hate crime? So there's a list of criteria they're supposed to look at on this side of the ledger. Over here it says, but you have to use the least restrictive means to ensure they return to court. I'm not sure how that's resolved easily. And I want judges to be held accountable for their decisions, because I don't really know which standard they're applying here. And so this is part of just fixing one area that I think is going to be, it's just important to get that clarity for the judges. So I didn't need crime data to show me anything. In fact, we look at data a lot, but I never said that the bail changes are responsible for the crime rate, because we had a nationwide crime rate. I always point it out. It's up all over the country. And statistically, we're still the safest big city, the safest big state in America. And I'm not just comparing ourselves to, Washington, Chicago, and LA. I'm talking about, San Antonio and Salt Lake City and other places that people say they're going to because they're safer. That's not the data. So that data should be looked at always. Look at it, understand it, study it. Are there trends we need to be concerned about? But that is unrelated to what we're trying to do right here, which is to correct a deficiency in state law.
Okay, thanks everyone. Samuel,
Governor, anything to say about Hector LaSalle? Any update on where that stands, or are we just sort of going forward?
Working on our budget, weighing all of our options. I couldn't hear.
Increase the budget by 14%?
That would not be necessary.